And thanks everybody for joining us today. Just our quick disclaimer, this presentation is for educational purposes only. It's not legal advice and does not create an attorney-client relationship on its own. We'll have some information at the end on contacting us if you have any specific questions or if you're interested in signing up. Also, we want you to get on with your day, so we'll go through this stuff fairly quickly. So we're discussing employment investigations today, but why are we talking about this now? Why would we bring this up? Well, it's something that comes up in the news. You hear about companies where an incident occurs and then the business is conducting an investigation while they're finding out or deciding what they want to do next. You do hear about that in the bigger context of large companies or well-known companies, maybe even a government entity, maybe a city, a state, the federal government. You hear about, oh, some sort of incident occurred and now we're learning about it publicly, and the company says, well, we're investigating, we're looking into it. A recent example that could come up in the news was there was a couple in the Boston area that attended a Coldplay concert. They got caught on a crowd cam, and their reaction caused the video of that to go viral. Well, it turned out that they worked together. That created all sorts of ripple effects within this company because these two individuals were seen publicly doing something that may go against company policy. So that's where you do see these items. They do exist, and that's sort of maybe on a macro scale with going viral, a huge AI-based company, those sorts of things. But even in running a business day to day, maybe your company isn't huge international AI firm, any kind of business, this risk exists for you, and it's something that you definitely want to be aware of. And that's what we want to try to do today, is talk about what it is, what some steps are, and why you should be concerned. So what is an employment investigation? It might sound sort of simple, might sound sort of obvious, but it's always a good place to start off with some fundamental definitions of things. Well, it's the process conducted by an employer of looking into allegations made by an employee of the company or by somebody from outside the organization. So an investigation can be triggered not just by an employee, but if you hear some outside information from someone. It generally means that something bad or wrong has happened and someone is now bringing that to the organization's attention. So that's just sort of a broad overview of what we want to talk about. How are complaints received? That is also something of interest, because there's a lot of different channels where something could come in to you as the business owner, as the employer, as the manager or head of a department. There's information that could come into you in a variety of different ways, but it's important to be aware of when something is coming in, what you need to do with it. So a lot of complaints could come in writing, or they could be made verbally to somebody within the organization. An employee could send you an email, or they could come up and speak to a manager and say, hey, there's something going on, or I witnessed something that I think you need to be aware of. An employee making a report could potentially be the person who's complaining about some behavior that they observed or they were on the receiving end of, or it could be somebody that witnessed something within your business. Information can also come in from an outside entity as well. So think of, like, you've got a client that sees or hears something, one of your vendors, a customer inside of a retail location, if you're in the retail side of things, or even a bystander who maybe witnesses something involving an employee, involving your company. They might say something to you. These outsiders who are interacting with your business frequently make reports to management on all kinds of different topics. It could be overhearing conversations between a couple of employees, seeing one employee or a customer treating an employee badly. There's all kinds of different things that could occur where you're going to receive information or a complaint on some behavior that relates to your company. Somebody might call your company, they might email you again. It could be an in-person conversation with somebody. If you have a website for your business, there could be a comment section where somebody is making a complaint. You could even hear something through word of mouth in the grapevine. Somebody could come up to you as a manager or owner or supervisor and say, hey, I didn't see this, but so-and-so told me that they witnessed something. So it could even come in through gossip, but it's something that once you hear it, you need to start evaluating what you want to do about it. So with complaints received in your business, generally we look at different types of areas of concern. There could be something that's a violation of the law. There could be somebody making a complaint about somebody blatantly doing something that's illegal. There could be a discussion of by an employee, hey, somebody did this or I witnessed this. I think this violates company policy. Or it could be a combination of both of those things. Both a violation of company policy and a violation of law could occur, and that could be some information that could come to you as a complaint that could trigger a potential investigation inside your business. So what are some of the big areas that we see where there could be complaints received? Well, one is sexual harassment. An example would be you've got the one employee who is always going to steer the conversations into a sexual direction. That's going to be a problem for your organization potentially if you get that sort of report. There could be a report of some sort of protected class harassment. So again, a protected class characteristic could be something like age, race, religion, disability, national origin, familial status, military service status. There's a lot of different areas that are protected for individuals. And if there's behavior that's occurring that is against that protected area, that could be an issue for your business that's going to trigger a investigation responsibility. Same for discrimination. If there's people making statements about someone's race, religion, national origin, those sorts of things, that can get into a area where you are legally obligated, which we will talk about shortly, to conduct an investigation to see what actually happened. Another big area of complaints that you could receive that you would want to look into could involve retaliation. That means the business or someone within the business taking negative employment action against somebody who has done something that's actually protected. An example would be if you've got an employee who is a whistleblower, another employee of theirs gets mad about the person being a whistleblower, they take an adverse action against them, that could be reported to you as an incident of retaliation that you'd want to look into. There's a lot of federal and state laws that protect workers in work situations from things like harassment, from things like discrimination, from retaliation. Those are things that you've got to be aware of, and some of them actually do trigger a legal requirement, as we mentioned, and we will discuss further to conduct an investigation. Other types of complaints that you might receive in the employment law and HR context could be things like theft. An employee maybe stole something from another employee, or an employee is accused of stealing something from another employee, or there could be an outsider stealing something from the company. Another common complaint could be improper recording of time. Someone might say, I know somebody took a lunch, but they said they worked through it. That's a complaint that you might receive. Or there can even be situations where one employee is trying to get back at another one, so they're going to make a bad faith allegation against a coworker that they don't like for some reason. They're going to say something like, oh, this guy left early and didn't punch out. That could also trigger an investigation within your organization. So we wanted to sort of frame that up of what different types of complaints you could be looking at. So why is an investigation required? In some cases, it's going to be a legal obligation. You're going to have to investigate if you receive certain types of reports. It's a very important consideration that you just don't want to push off to the side. There are federal laws and state laws that require an employer, if they get a report of certain types of behavior, to conduct an investigation. The big law that I'm thinking of is the Civil Rights Act of 1964. There's specifically Title VII covering things like harassment and discrimination. If you get a complaint along those lines as an employer, then you have an obligation to look into that complaint. If you don't do it, you're creating legal liability for yourself. That's what you want to avoid. We've got this on the chart here. If you fail to avoid or fail to perform the investigation, that could generate liability for your organization under law. The scary thing about some of these legally mandated investigation situations is that if an investigation is not conducted after a report is received, not only could the organization itself face liability for failing to conduct an investigation, but individuals within the organization could face personal liability. That applies if there's a sexual harassment claim, for example. So if there's a supervisor, a manager, or an owner who received a report of wrongful sexual harassment, but they didn't conduct an investigations or take steps to fix that situation, there could be personal liability, not just liability for the business. Another reason for performing an investigation is protection. And that kind of goes hand in hand with liability. Performing the investigation helps protect your business. It also helps prevent future incidents from occurring. It could lead you to understand if there's issues that need to be addressed. It can lead you to improving your policies, your employee processes. You can prevent the need for an investigation through these steps and through looking at potential risks of not taking steps to make sure that you're on point with what you're doing. So overall, investigating incidents really is a responsibility for an employer. Again, sometimes it might be a legal requirement as well, again, with the case of sexual harassment. But you also want to think about it as a responsibility for the successful operation of your business and the protection of your employees, even if it may not be required by law. So it's a best practice. Even if you don't have to legally conduct an investigation, it's still a best practice to do so. Think of things like theft, think of things like improper recording of time. If you get those kind of reports, even though there's not necessarily a legal obligation to look into it, it's always a best practice to do so, because that can help you understand what's going on inside your organization and tighten things up where needed. So what are some of the steps involved if you're going to conduct an employment investigation inside your business? Well, first one obviously is you got to receive the complaint. But once you've received the complaint, you want to look at it. Does it appear to be made in good faith? Is it something where you think, I don't know, somebody might be trying to get somebody in trouble? Again, you always have to investigate certain types of complaints like sexual harassment if those are received. But part of the process can still be evaluating, does the complaint appear to be in good faith? While the investigation is occurring, do any employees need to be moved to a different work area? That's a very important consideration with things like sexual harassment, to separate the parties involved. And we do get questions on this when incidents come up. People send us questions through the portal. Hey, I've got this report of a potential harassment situation. What do I do? This is something that we address one-on-one with our clients, but here we're just generally talking about the overview of the steps. But you may end up just separating people while an investigation is in progress, and you want to also inform anybody that's involved in the complaint process and in the investigation process that your company takes these complaints seriously and that it wants to take steps to make things right if needed. One of the other things that you want to look at as well are determining who's going to conduct your investigation. There's some different choices that you're going to have depending on the size of your organization, depending on the training within your organization of specific individuals, who is going to be conducting the investigation. So in a lot of organizations, it's the human resources department. There could be personnel within your business that are trained to conduct employee investigations, that's something that they specialize in, or one of the areas they specialize in, and they can go through and perform that for you. Same for a senior manager. You may have an experienced or trained senior manager within your organization that could have the skills and the knowledge to look into an employment related complaint that through an investigation to see exactly what's going on. Another possible investigator could be an outside entity, and when it's an outside entity, generally then it's going to be an attorney, or it's going to be a group of attorneys at a specific law firm. If you do use an attorney to specifically, hire them hourly to conduct your investigation, that can help your business preserve attorney-client confidentiality in terms of any information provided to the attorney can be argued that it's protected by the attorney-client privilege. That can help your organization in terms of having an outsider work with your investigation. When you're looking at who's going to be involved in the investigation, there's generally a recurring group of people. The first person is going to be the complainant, the person who actually made the complaint about whatever wrongful conduct, activity, whatever was reported to trigger the investigation. The complainant is going to have to be part of that investigation. It starts with that person. The degree of cooperation you may get from that individual depends on whether they're an employee. Maybe if it's an outsider making a report to your business, they might say, hey, I wanted to let you know, but I just don't really want to get involved. I mean, that's a possibility that could occur, but if it's an employee within your organization, you're generally going to have more success in getting information from them. You're also going to need to speak to the alleged offender, alleged wrongdoer, whatever you want to say. You want to get all sides of the story. You don't just want to rely on what the complainant says necessarily. You want to, if there's somebody who's within your organization who's accused of some wrongdoing, you want to get their side of the story as well. You need that full picture, and it can also help you determine if the person making the complaint did so in bad faith to maybe try to get somebody in trouble. They don't like them. But you're going to want to speak with the alleged offender. And then witnesses. If there are any witnesses, it's also a best practice to include them as part of the investigation. That's another part of getting the full picture. And that can provide you with the most information to assess and help you put all that information together to use for making your decision on what happened and what do you need to do about it, if anything. Another recommendation that we have if you're conducting an investigation is you want to create a timeline. It's a good idea to have a chronology of the events. It helps keep things organized. Having a timeline is very, very useful for staying on top of facts and keeping things super organized. So you want the day, the date, the time. You want all of those pieces of information included in your chronology, and it helps the person investigating or people investigating see the picture more clearly. You should also keep track of the information received and any steps taken. Who did you hear from? When did you hear from them? What did you do with this information? This can be added to your chronology as well, but you want to stay very organized with things like on the 15th, we received a verbal report from employee ABC. On the 16th, we received an email from witness XYZ, and they said this. All those pieces of information with the chronology, with the timeline, are going to help keep you organized. And then also, you want to look at how is the investigation going to be conducted? What order are things going to go in? For example, sometimes businesses have security cameras, for example. If there's potentially security footage of something that occurred that is triggering an investigation, review it, take a look at it. It could put some complaints to bed right away. If somebody is accused of doing something at a certain place in a certain time, you look at the footage, that person wasn't even there. That could help you say, oh, I think this is a bad faith complaint. The individual wasn't even at that location. We have the camera footage. That sorts of thing. Those sorts of things could be important in helping with your investigation. And then who do you want to speak to, and in what order do you want to speak to? As a best practice, you want to look at starting your investigation very soon after your complaint is received. You don't want to sit on that. You want to keep things moving quickly. If you've got a prompt investigation, that can help you fulfill a legal requirement. Again, for a topic like sexual harassment, where you're required to investigate, doing it quickly can help keep your risk level somewhat lower. And then who to talk to and when do you want to speak with them? Generally speaking, the complainant is talked to first. They're the person filing the report or making the report. They need to be interviewed as well. I mean, they can provide a report to you, but there should also be an interview of that individual. Witnesses and other coworkers are generally interviewed after the complainant. If there are any witnesses, that is. Sometimes there are no witnesses, but that's something to be aware of, is to get the witnesses in there as well. The accused is also generally interviewed after the complainant and the witnesses have already been talked to. They're kind of the last piece of the puzzle in many cases, starting, again, with the person making the complaint, going to the witnesses, if any, and then going to the person who's accused of doing something wrong. They need to be interviewed as well, as we mentioned, but they are generally done last in order. And yeah, you may need second interviews of some of these individuals. If you want to clarify details, if you get some conflicting information, there may be a time when you have to go back to somebody and try to get additional information from them. When you are actually conducting an interview of the people involved, the relevant parties, each person generally should be spoken to separately. So you want to talk to the complainant separately, the accused separately, and then any witnesses. They should all be spoken to separately. And the ideal process when you are speaking to someone is to have at least 2 representatives from your organization present in that meeting with either the complainant, the accused, or any witnesses. One of your organization representatives is going to ask questions, and the other person is going to take notes, and they're going to serve as a witness. Part of the interview is going to be whoever you're speaking to, you're going to explain the interview process to them. You can state that the purpose of the interview relates to some general information that you've received, and you want to ask some questions about that. An example would be, we heard from Ron about some potential issues with you, or we heard from Ron about some potential issues with Jenny. We just want to discuss that today. That could be the sort of opening statement that you'd have where it's kind of broad, it's kind of general, and you are telling them what's happening and why you're speaking with them. It's also a good idea to let anybody you're interviewing know what's going to happen at the end of the investigation process. You can let them know that once the investigation's completed, the company's going to attempt to determine what occurred, and then it's going to take appropriate action if needed based on the information that you've looked through. You can also let the participants in the interviews know that you, as the organization, you're going to attempt to keep the information confidential as much as you can, but you may need to potentially share some information during the investigation as part of the process. Another big area of concern with investigations is retaliation. During the interviews, you want to let anybody that you're speaking to who works in your organization, you want to let them know that the company does not tolerate retaliation in connection with an employment investigation, any employment investigation. You can also let anyone that you know that you're speaking to during the investigation, you can let them know to bring any incidents of potential retaliation to management's attention immediately. We bring this up because retaliation is prohibited in many cases by law, but also it's really the most common employment law claim we see against employers is a retaliation claim. It's also the easiest claim to win for an employee. So that's something that you've got to be very, very careful with, and you want to make sure that your no retaliation message is very clearly communicated during the investigation to any of the employees that you're speaking to as part of that process. You can verbally tell employees during any investigation interviews that we don't condone, we don't accept retaliation, and so you've got to let us know if something that you feel is retaliatory is occurring based on your participation in this investigation. It's also a good idea to have written no retaliation policies, such as in your employee handbook. Those of you who we have prepared employee handbooks from, we do have language in those handbooks discussing that retaliation can't be part of employment practices. When you're going through the interviews for the investigation, there's some kind of broad thoughts to keep in mind with speaking with people. It's always a good idea, for example, to ask open-ended questions, not yes or no questions. So an example of that would be, don't ask, were you at work on Friday afternoon? The person will say yes. That's not the kind of question you want to ask. The question instead would be, can you tell me a little bit about what was going on in your work area Friday afternoon? That's more of an open-ended question. It's neutral. That requires the person being interviewed as part of the investigation to respond with kind of the who, what, when, where, and why answers. You're putting them in a position to provide you with factual information if you're not asking a yes or no question. During the interview with the company representatives present, you want to make sure that you're noting responses, reactions, people's body language of everybody being interviewed. That can help when you're looking into the truth of statements. It can help you see if somebody is perhaps being dishonest or if they're really severely upset or very moved by what's going on So observing and recording those reactions is very, very important. And another factor that you want to consider as part of the investigation process is to have each interviewee prepare a written statement to say in their own words what happened. They can send that to you in an email. It could be a Word document. They could handwrite it, but you want to have an employee providing their version of the events in a written statement. If you run into somebody who is unwilling to provide a written statement, and that might happen, you may have an employee who's a witness. They're reluctant to participate in the investigation, even if it's an issue such as sexual harassment, again, where the company has to investigate by law. You may get people that are reluctant to participate. If they won't write a written statement for you, you can instead ask them to read interview notes taken by a company representative during the meeting, and then have that person who's not going to provide a statement just put their initials on it or acknowledge in some way that, yeah, this is what we discussed in the meeting. Once you've conducted your interviews, you've looked at any outside evidence, or I should say additional evidence you might have, like security footage, you've got statements, you want to go through all of that information. You want to look at everything that you've got, again, whether it's from a person directly speaking, from them writing a statement, from notes of your investigators inside your organization. You want to look at all of that information. The management team can go through everything and discuss the results, and then maybe look at some proposed action of what they might or want to do with the investigation results. Now, this discussion should be limited to those with a need to know on a need to know basis within the investigation. So it doesn't necessarily have to be, if it's a bigger organization, not everybody in the human resources department or not everybody on the management team needs to know all of the specifics, all of the details of every investigation. Instead, that can be compartmentalized down to the individuals who work on this specific issue. Now, in a smaller organization, it may be the owner and the manager. It may be something like that, but you want to keep it confidential to the extent you can, and only share on a need to know basis. I think that's the most protection for an organization. And as you go through the information that you've gathered, you want to assess credibility. So you want to look at things like memory of the people who are speaking, what their perceptions were, how truthful did they seem? Are there any corroboration of statements? For example, you've got the complainant saying something. If there are witnesses and they're saying that, no, that's not what I heard, you want to have corroboration, or note if there's any lack of corroboration of statements. You want to take a look at the bias of any witnesses. Does somebody not like somebody? Are there other underlying biases that may be in place? It's a good idea to look at the consistency of the accounts amongst those interviewed. How does it line up? Is it on track? Is everybody seeing the same thing, or is it sort of all over the place? Another factor to consider is prior misconduct, or maybe lack of prior misconduct with somebody who maybe has been accused of something. And if there is prior misconduct, what does that mean? How does that implicate what we're doing here? You also want to look at the plausibility of the accounts of those interviewed. I mean, does it seem real? Does it seem right? Those are factors that you would build into the investigation. You want to review documents that you have, look at the complaint reports, look at the witness statements, look at your internal management notes, and then you want to determine if remedial action is going to be needed. So could that be counseling? Could that be a verbal warning, written warning, suspension, demotion, termination? There's a lot of different things that can come out of an employment investigation, or potentially no action because the information just isn't there. And some of the remedial action factors that you'll want to look at are things like the credibility of the people involved, including the witnesses. You know, are they credible? Are they credible employees? Are they credible workers? If somebody, it's looking like they had done something wrong, is there any prior discipline against that person within the organization? What is the severity of the behavior? Is it just something that was a one-off and low level, or is it this person have a history of frequent wrongdoing? Do the people involved have knowledge of the company policies? You know, has the person who's accused of wrongdoing, if they're an employee, have they signed off on the employee handbook, for example, saying, hey, you can't say or do these certain things? And what has your precedent been previously with similar issues? The organization, to protect itself, should try to stay within similar similar actions for similar types of activities with employees. You want to stay consistent as much as you can. Once you've gone through the investigation, you want to communicate and you want to finalize. Oh, can we go back one? Thanks. So you want to communicate findings of the investigation. You want to tell the accuser, the person who made the initial complaint that triggered the investigation. You want to communicate what you found out and what actions are going to be taken. You can also remind the person of the no retaliation rules of your business, saying, hey, if you experience anything you feel is retaliatory, you got to let us know as quickly as you can. You also need to communicate to the person who's accused, if they're your employee, of any wrongdoing. Let them know what you found, let them know what actions are going to be taken based on this, and also let them know that they are not allowed to retaliate against anybody who's participated in the investigation. When you finalize your documentation, you want to have probably a confidential harassment file that you place that in. Some state requirements could vary, and that's something that we can assist you with, but you want to have basically a report as to where you got to with your investigation. It's also a good idea to really look at, after you've gone through an investigation, go back and take a look at your organizational policies. Determine if everybody involved had received proper communication of your policies. Again, that could be through a handbook. It could be a standalone document or policy that people have received. You want to check to make sure everybody was aware of that and received it. If you're running your business successfully, and again, this is something that we frequently recommend, is it's always the best practice to have an employee handbook in place. And within that employee handbook, you want to have some specific policies, and having these policies in place and having the employees acknowledge them, they're going to help provide you with protection if something is happening. So you want to have basically like an open door policy saying, hey, employees can contact management at any time if they've got concerns about specific behavior. Again, that's an open door policy. They can also be told in your policies to report to management of any improper behavior that they experience themselves or that they witness. You can let them know, generally in an anti-discrimination, anti-harassment, or anti-retaliation policies, that they need to let the company know if something happens, they see something. Again, the best place to have that information in one spot is in your employee handbook. And after you've communicated, you've finalized, then you've got to look at, okay, now what are we going to do? So in some cases, there could be a warning issued to someone who may have done something wrong, or even before a warning, there might be employee counseling. You sit down with that individual and say, hey, we got this report, we looked into it, as you know, this is what we've learned. The action that we're going to take with this is we're going to tell you, we're going to counsel you right now, don't do that. Here's our policies. Be aware that if something along this line happens again, it's going to be more serious. You could be in more trouble. That's a possible thing. Again, counseling or warning. There could also be discipline that occurs. It could be a formal write-up. It could be somebody being suspended. Somebody could be demoted. Those are examples of discipline. They could be placed on a performance improvement plan or be given a last chance agreement. If this happens again, you're gone. Those are examples of discipline that could be in place, or there could be termination. Somebody might have to get fired if your investigation shows very serious wrongful conduct took place. And with taking action, there's a couple of main points to keep in mind. One would be consistent. Make sure similarly situated employees are treated in the same manner. We mentioned that a little bit earlier, but your company handling investigations and any follow-up actions, whether that again be a warning, counseling, discipline, or termination, treating similarly situated employees in the same manner gives the most protection to your company. And then number two, you want to have documentation of the investigation. Again, that can involve noting the initial complaint, the written statements from the witnesses, the manager notes from interviews, any formal conclusions reached by the company. Documenting that information is a good way to help protect your company in this type of situation. So we want to give a couple case studies today. We want to have a chance for folks who are listening to just check this out, listen to it, think about it, and make a decision on the information provided. So, okay, first one, say you're the HR manager at your company. An employee has reported that they heard a customer making offensive comments to another employee. The employee who is reportedly the target of the offensive comments has not yet informed anyone at the company of the incident. So, true or false? The individual who allegedly made the offensive comment was a customer and not an employee. Because the customer is an outsider and not an employee, the company doesn't have to investigate. Outsider did something wrong towards an employee, but they're not an employee. So as a result, the company doesn't have to investigate. Is that true or is that false? Take a second. Answer, that's false. So why is it false? The management of the company, here the HR manager, was made aware of a potentially harassing or discriminatory conduct occurring that involved their employee. The term offensive, as we went through the facts, can be determined to mean discriminatory or harassing. So discrimination could be based on protected class. That could be someone's age, religion, race, disability, etc. Or harassment could occur against somebody based on sexual harassment or protected class-based harassment. So if you're in a situation where there has been potential discrimination or harassment, if you become aware of it, even if it's not proven, but you're aware of it, then you've got that obligation to investigate. You've got that liability on your company if you don't investigate, for example, in the case of report of sexual harassment, so you've got to jump into that investigation. In this case, it doesn't matter that an outsider was involved in making the comments. It does not have to be an employee to an employee action that occurred to create an issue for an employer. And it also doesn't matter that the employee who was the recipient of the comments didn't make the report to the company. Another employee, or really anyone, could make a report to you in management that this bad behavior had occurred. So the witness could come to you, a customer could come to you, a vendor could come to you and say, hey, I heard somebody really saying some pretty terrible things to one of your employees. If you get that report, then you got to look at it, especially again if it's a case involving discrimination or harassment. Also a best practice, if not legally required, to look into it. So our second case study. Susan, an employee of your company, verbally reports to her supervisor that she feels she was denied a promotion based on her age. Susan refuses to write a statement or provide any further information, but she does state that she doesn't want to pursue an investigation and she's planning on retiring anyway in the not too distant future. So her basic statement is, look, I don't even want to get into this. This is a hassle. I'm not saying anything. Based on these facts, does the company still need to investigate? Answer again, yes. Even though the employee who reportedly received the comments doesn't want to pursue an investigation or provide a statement, the company still needs to do an investigation. If you are made aware of alleged discrimination, you're required to look into it. The employee who doesn't want to cooperate can be told, hey, look, the company has to look into this. We've got a legal obligation to look further into what happened. So we're gonna move forward. You can let them know that that's the case. So how can we help you with employment investigations? Well, we advise on investigation situations. That's the type of question that we regularly get. Everything from this incident occurred, do we have to investigate, to we're in the investigation, we've hit this spot, what are our next steps? That's something that we can absolutely advise you on. We can help you with best practices as well if you're conducting employment investigations. That's something that we discussed a little bit earlier today. It's a best practice generally, as we say, even if there's not a legal obligation, if you receive a report of some sort of wrongdoing, it's a best practice to look into, at a minimum, that report. There's also do's and don'ts with investigations. We can help you with some of those. So you want to avoid costly investigation mistakes, sign up with us today. We've got you covered and we've got answers that you can rely on. So if you're already a client, thank you so much. Reach out to us through the portal if you have any questions. And if you're not a client, but you're interested, we've got some information on the screen to get a hold of us. Thanks, everybody.